Steve's Game Blog!
Welcome to the world of Root. Root is an asymmetrical war game in which you play as one of 4 incredibly varied factions in a bid to gain control of the forest and win the respect or subservience of the local woodland creatures. The factions are the orange Marquise de Cat, the blue Eyrie Dynasties, the green Woodland Alliance, and the grey Vagabond. While the factions do have different playstyles, there are a number of common terms and concepts you should familiarize yourself with, including the game board, pieces, cards, and actions. There are only 2 ways to win at Root. The first is to be the first player to collect 30 victory points, and the second, alternate way, is to play and complete one of the 4 dominance cards. Here's the basic autumn game board of Root. There's a more advanced winter board on the reverse, but new players should always start with the autumn board. The board is made up of many clearings, connected by paths. Each clearing is denoted with a suit, either rabbit, mouse, and fox. This suit represents the forest citizens of that particular clearing, whom you're trying to influence. Each clearing also has a number of slots, which are where you will place buildings. You cannot place a building in a clearing without an empty slot. Each faction has their own variants, but there are 3 basic pieces to keep track of in Root: warriors, buildings, and tokens. Warriors are your army, and they are what you use to move around the map and do battle. Buildings are square pieces which can only be placed in building slots in clearings, while tokens are round pieces that can be placed anywhere in a clearing and do not require a slot. There are a few exceptions, but generally you rule a clearing when you have the most total warriors and buildings, tokens don't count, in that clearing. Ruling clearings is an integral part of Root, and many actions require you to rule a clearing. For example, in this clearing, the Marquise de Cat player rules as he has 3 warriors and a building, while the Eyrie player only has 3 warriors. Let's take a look at the cards of Root, as they are the one object that is shared between all players. Everyone draws from the same deck and discards to the same discard pile. Cards are made up of 2 major sections, a suit and a crafting effect. This can actually be a bit confusing for new players, so remember this golden rule: if you're crafting a card, ignore the suit. If you're using a card for any other reason, ignore the crafting effect and focus only on the suit. You may have noticed that the card suits match up to the board suits, with the exception of the birds. That's because birds are everywhere. In Root, bird cards are considered wild and do not have to match the suit of the clearing they are used in like the other cards. Finally, dominance cards are special cards that when played give you an alternate win condition. You remove your score marker from the board and instead must complete the action listed on the card. For example, to win with rabbit dominance, I would have to rule 3 rabbit clearings at the start of my turn. While every faction has its own unique types of actions, there are 3 main actions that all players will be doing on their turn: move, battle, and craft. When you take a move action, you can take any number of your warriors from one clearing and move them to an adjacent clearing. You must rule either the clearing you are moving from or the clearing you are moving to. To take a battle action, you choose a clearing where you have warriors and there are enemy pieces for you to battle. You are the attacker and they are the defender. You don't have to rule a clearing to do battle in it. There are 3 stages to a battle. First, the defender can choose to play an ambush card of a matching suit from their hand, which instantly removes 2 of the attacker's warriors. The attacker can cancel out the defender's ambush by playing a matching ambush card of his own, but otherwise you can't use ambush cards offensively. You can also only do this once. You can't chain multiple ambush cards. Next, the attacker will roll the dice. The attacker takes the result of the higher number and the defender the lower number. Finally, we deal hits. Each piece in Root only has a single hit point. Attacking and defending warriors do their hits simultaneously. So, if I was the Marquis player attacking the Eyrie player in this clearing, and I rolled a 2 and a 1, I would deal 2 hits and remove 2 bird pieces, while he would deal 1 hit and remove 1 cat piece. It's worthwhile noting you can only deal as many hits as you have warriors, so even if the Eyrie rolled a 2 in this scenario, because he had only 1 warrior capable of dealing hits, he would still have only dealt 1 hit. All enemy warriors in a clearing must be removed before you can start to remove buildings and tokens, and the defending player can decide in which order his buildings and tokens are removed. You score 1 victory point for each building removed. Now let's look at crafting. Crafting can be one of the most confusing aspects of the game for new players, as while every faction can craft, the way that they craft is very different. To craft a card, you must have as many crafting resources in matching clearings as listed on the card. For example, this card requires you to have a crafting resource in a fox clearing. This one requires 3 resources in mouse clearings. This one requires 1 of each, mouse, fox, and rabbits. Marquise de Cat crafts with workshops. The Eyrie crafts with roosts. The Woodland Alliance crafts with sympathy tokens, and the Vagabond crafts with hammers. Using a crafting resource does not exhaust or remove the resource, you simply have to possess it. The only exception to this rule is the Vagabond, who must exhaust a hammer to craft with it. However, you can only use each crafting resource once per turn. For example, if I'm playing as the Marquise de Cat and I want to craft this card, I simply point to a workshop I possess in the requisite clearing, announcing to the other players that I will activate this workshop to craft this card. If I wanted to craft another card on my turn, say this one, I could not reuse that same workshop I used before. When you craft a card, you gain its effect. There are 3 main types of effect: instant, persistent, and one-off. Instant effects are denoted with a yellow box and happen instantly as soon as you craft the card. In most cases, they will give you an item from the item supply, which you will place on your crafted items box and earn victory points. Persistent and once-off effects are denoted with a blue box and are tucked under your player board when crafted. Persistent effects last for the rest of the game, while once-off effects must be discarded. To set up the game board, first set up the item supply by placing each item on its corresponding square. Put each of the ruin tokens on the ruin squares, and have every player put their victory point marker on 0. Then have each player read and perform the specific setup instructions listed on the back of each faction's game board. Then deal 3 cards to each player, and you're ready to play. For your first game, I recommend you follow the instructions in the How to Play Root walkthrough booklet and cards included in the game box. Now let's take a look at what each specific faction will do on their turn. The Marquis de Cat is probably the most beginner-friendly faction. Broadly, he wants to expand his empire of sawmills, workshops, and recruiters across the entire forest, using his army to defend his bases. He scores points every time he builds buildings. The Marquis has 2 bonus abilities. The first is the Keep, a token that starts in one of the corners of the map. While it stands, no other player can place buildings or tokens in this clearing. The second ability is the Field Hospital. Whenever any of your warriors are removed, you can discard a card matching the clearing they were defeated in to send all of those warriors back to your keep. Here's a basic overview of the Marquis's turn. In Birdsong, the Marquis places one wood token at every sawmill they own. In Daylight, the Marquis can craft using workshops as a crafting resource, and then perform up to 3 of these actions. They can battle in a clearing with enemy pieces. They can march, which allows them to take 2 move actions instead of the regular 1. They can overwork by discarding a card to place 1 wood at a sawmill of a matching suit. They can recruit, placing a single warrior at every recruiter, or they can build by discarding wood tokens equal to the cost of the next building in its track and placing the building in an empty slot in a clearing they rule. The Marquis can also discard a bird card from their hand to take an extra action per bird card discarded. Note that all of the Marquis's actions can be performed multiple times in a single turn, with the exception of Recruit, which can only be done once. Finally, in Evening, the Marquis draws 1 card plus an additional card for each card symbol that has been revealed. The Eyrie Dynasties is a somewhat similar playstyle to the Marquis, in which it wants to maintain a large presence on the map, as it scores points for however many roosts they have on the map at the end of their turn. The trick with the Eyrie is that they are bound by their decree, a set of cards that determines the actions that they must take every turn. The Eyrie has 2 special abilities. The first is the Lords of the Forest, which allows them to rule clearings whenever there is a tie. The second is the Disdain for Trade, which means they only ever get a single victory point for crafting items, regardless of what it says on the card. In Birdsong, you'll first draw a card if your hand is empty, and then add 1 or 2 cards to the decree. You must add at least 1 card, and only one of the cards added can be a bird card. Then, if you don't have any roosts on the board, you'll place 1 and 3 warriors in the clearing with the fewest pieces. In Daylight, first, you can craft using roosts as crafting resources. Then, the rest of your turn is dictated by your decree. For every card in your decree, you must complete the accompanying action. You must complete your decree in order: recruit, move, battle, build. For example, in this decree, I have a rabbit card in my recruit column, so I must recruit in a rabbit clearing with a roost. Next, my move column has a bird card in it, which means that I can move from any clearing to any clearing. Next, I have a fox card in the battle column, so I must initiate a battle in a fox clearing. Finally, I have a bird card in my build column, which means I must build a roost in any clearing, taking a roost from my track and placing it in a spare building slot in a clearing that I rule. If at any point while I'm working through my decree, I can't perform any of the actions listed, for example, if I have a rabbit card in my build column, but I don't rule any rabbit clearings with a spare building slot for me to build in, or I have a rabbit card in my recruit column, but my supply of spare warriors has been completely exhausted, I would move into Turmoil. When you go into Turmoil, you lose 1 victory point per bird card in your decree. Discard your entire decree, remove your leader from the board, and choose a new one, placing the new leader's viziers on the appropriate actions in your decree. Once you move into your evening phase, either by successfully completing your decree or being forced into turmoil, you score victory points equal to the number under the last uncovered roost in your track, and draw a card +1 for each uncovered card symbol. The Woodland Alliance is the most complex of Root's 4 factions to play. Unlike the Marquise or the Eyrie, the Alliance's army is a small guerrilla force. Rather than trying to control large sections of the map, you'll strike out in small raids, slowly gather supporters, and secure sympathy for your cause with the woodland creatures of the forest. The Alliance scores points by placing sympathy tokens. The Alliance's special ability is that when defending in battle, it takes the higher number instead of the lower number. That means as the Alliance player, you always take the higher role in combat. The most important aspect of the Alliance is that you have two sets of cards. Your hand, which functions the same way as most other players' hands, allowing you to play cards for the suit and craft them, and your supporters stack, which is only used for its suit and only for some specific actions. It's very important that you keep these two sets of cards separate and distinct. In Birdsong, you'll first have the option to revolt. As revolting requires you to have already spread sympathy, it's impossible to do on the first turn. Nonetheless, to revolt, you choose a clearing where you have sympathy, then discard two cards from your supporter's stack that match that clearing. Revolting removes all enemy pieces. You then place a base and as many warriors as you have matching clearings. Then you place an officer in your officer's box. A very powerful move that requires some setup. Next, you'll have the option to spread sympathy. To spread sympathy, simply choose a clearing adjacent to a sympathetic clearing if possible that doesn't already have sympathy in it, and discard matching cards from your supporter's stack as indicated by the current sympathy level. If there are 3 or more enemy warriors in the clearing, you'll have to discard an additional card. Place a sympathy token in the clearing and score points equal to the number under the token. Every time an enemy player moves warriors into a sympathetic clearing, or removes a sympathy token through battle, he must place a matching card from the clearing that he removed the token or moved into on top of your supporter's stack. Or if he has no matching card, he must show you his hand and place the top card of the draw deck on your stack. In Daylight, you can craft cards using sympathy tokens as crafting resources, transfer as many cards as you want from your hand to your supporter's stack, or train an officer by discarding a card matching a built base to place a warrior from your supply into your officer's box. In Evening, you'll perform your military actions, but they'll require you to have at least had one revolt, as you need officers to take actions. Each officer allows you to perform one of these 4 actions. Move, battle, recruit by placing a warrior at any already built base, organize by removing a warrior and placing a sympathy token in that clearing, which also scores the points listed underneath that sympathy token, as if you were placing that token normally. Then you'll draw a card, plus an additional card for each card symbol currently revealed, and discard down to 5. Remember, if an enemy ever destroys one of your bases, you'll have to discard all matching supporters and remove half of your officers. In this case, I would remove these 3 bird cards and this 1 rabbit card from my stack. Finally, let's take a look at the Vagabond. The Vagabond is the most unique of Root's base factions in that he has no army and places no buildings or tokens on the board. Instead, he controls a single pawn and takes his turn by exhausting items in his satchel by flipping them to their exhausted side. He scores points from either aiding friendly players by giving them cards, removing hostile players' pieces in battle, or by simply aiding the woodland creatures by completing quests. At the start of the game, all players are indifferent to you. Moving another player's warrior in any way moves that player to hostile, which can only be reversed by playing a dominance card. Aiding players will move them up in standing, and until eventually reaching allied status. When allied with a player, you may move and battle with their warriors as if they were your own. In Birdsong, you'll first refresh 3 of your exhausted items, plus an additional 2 items per T that you have. Then you may slip, which is a free movement to an adjacent clearing or forest. This is the only way in the game to move into a forest, and you are the only player that can interact with forest. In Daylight, you'll perform as many actions as you like, exhausting an item for each action performed. Here's a quick rundown. To move, exhaust the boots. To explore a ruin, exhaust a torch. Remove the ruin token from the game, place the item underneath it in your satchel, and score a victory point. To battle, exhaust a sword. As you only have a single pawn, your swords count as maximum hits in battle. So, if I had 2 swords in my satchel and rolled a 3 and a 2, I could deal 2 damage maximum. As your pawn can never be removed from the board, you take hits by damaging items of your choice, moving them to the damaged box. Items that are damaged cannot be used until they are repaired. To aid a player, exhaust any item of your choice. Give a player in your clearing a card matching that clearing. If they have 1 or more items in their crafted item box, you may take any 1 item. Then you change your relationship, depending on the number of times you have aided that player this turn, and score points equal to the relationship level. For example, to move from indifferent to level 1, you only have to aid that player once, and you score 1 point. To move from level 1 to level 2, you must aid them twice in the same turn. To move from level 2 to allied, you must aid them 3 times, and you'll score 2 points. Finally, once allied, you score 2 points every time you give aid. To complete a quest, exhaust the requisite items in a matching clearing, then claim the reward, either drawing 2 cards or scoring victory points equal to each matching quest you have completed this game, including the quest you have just completed. When completing a quest, draw a new quest from the quest stack to replace it. To strike, exhaust a crossbow and remove an enemy piece in your clearing, starting with warriors. Note, you do not gain additional points for removing hostile pieces this way. Hammers can be used in 2 ways. First, you can exhaust a hammer to use it as a crafting resource for a card in your hand, crafting the card and gaining the reward. Secondly, you can exhaust a hammer to repair any one of your damaged items. Finally, each Vagabond character card has a special ability. For example, the thief can exhaust a torch to steal a card from any player in his clearing. In your evening, first, if you are in a forest, you repair all of your items for free. As you can only enter a forest with your slip in Birdsong, you essentially have to skip your entire daylight turn for this full repair ability. You'll draw a card, plus an extra card for every coin stack you have, discard down to 5, and remove items in your satchel down to 6, or plus an extra 2 per bag. Remember the dominance cards? Since the Vagabond cannot rule clearings, he instead has a special rule. Playing any dominance card forms a coalition between yourself and the player with the fewest points. Remove your point marker from the game and change that player's status to allied, even if they were previously hostile. You can no longer score your own victory points and only win if the other player in your coalition wins. So there you have it, the basics of Root. I know it seems like a lot to take in all at once, and that there are a lot of moving parts, but once you get into the thick of it, there's really only a handful of actions each player can take on their turn. The general strategy for each faction is, for Marquise de Cat, build, build, build. Don't worry too much if your troops and buildings get removed, they're expendable, especially using your field hospital ability. Avoid combat if you can, and focus on simply dominating with the sheer presence of your massive army. For the Eyrie Dynasties, be very aggressive. You start out with a small position and you'll have to aggressively expand, taking over as many clearings as possible to get a solid number of roosts out. Try to avoid going into turmoil by placing build cards in the battle and build slots, but accept that it will likely happen a couple times per game. For the Woodland Alliance, you are very weak at the start of the game, so try to avoid conflict as much as possible. Once you have a base, defend it with your life. Losing one can be devastating. It's usually best to simply entrench yourself around your bases, sending out warriors only to organize them into sympathy tokens for big points boost. For the Vagabond, items are your lifeblood, so at the start of the game get as many as possible. You should make a beeline for the ruins and aid any player that crafts an item. Try not to become hostile with more than one player. It can really hinder your movement around the map, and having too many damaged items can force you to skip a whole turn to repair. Best of luck, and I hope you have fun.